She is the founder and CEO of BeyondGlobal. She is a world leading authority on finance and macroeconomics. She's an advisor to some of the greatest household name CEOs on the planet. She is a speaker, an author, and her most recent books, Superhubs, is already an international bestseller, and it's already on the prestigious Bloomberg Book of the Year. It's on that list, and she is with us here today. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here, Anthony.
Thank you so much indeed for coming along. So as I said, it's an international bestseller, but it's also got some incredible endorsements. Just to name a few, we've got Stephen Schwarzman, CEO of Blackstone, Larry Summers, President of Harvard University, Nobel laureate Ned Phelps, His Excellency, Mr. Aziz, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, and Professor Klaus Schwab, Chairman of the World Economic Forum. I could go on and on, but I know I'd bore you. But why has, obviously those endorsements are great for book sales, but why has this book hit such a nerve?
Well, I think it's because today we're seeing a crisis of capitalism. Many people think that the system is rigged, and the superhubs that I describe in my book, they do see the problem, they have identified it, but it's very hard to change the system, even if you're a part of the system in such a privileged position.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and talk about privileged position. As you say in the book, today 8 people hold the same amount of wealth as the world's 3.6 billion poorest. So that's a huge, these people are extraordinarily powerful, aren't they? Is it the leverage that they get through the fact that they're in finance, which is different to any other sector, do you think?
It's a result of power loss, and power loss is a dynamic of network science. I've explained the financial system through the people at the very top with the help of network science. And network science is a relatively new science and has gained popularity with the upcoming social media, essentially. Yeah. And it's a mathematical substantialization of how networks form, how they behave. And they always have the same structure, no matter if they're natural or man-made. Networks always consist of these little dots that you see in graphs that are connected by whatever they're, little lines, and they're called nodes, the dots that are connected, and the dots at the outset, at the fringes, have a few connections, and the more you get to the closer you get to the center, the more connected nodes are, and the nodes at the very center are called the superhubs, and they're connected to virtually everything else. And in my book, I call these people at the top of the financial system, whether it be CEOs of banks or of big billion-dollar funds or central bank governors, I call them the superhubs because they're connected with everything and everyone, and they have the most power over the system.
Okay, so give me an example of a few names.
Well, that would be Mario Draghi or Janet Yellen, central bank governors who, the head of the Fed of the United States is probably the most powerful person next to the president, and you have to see those people are not democratically elected. And so also it could be a Jamie Dimon, it could be a Mervyn King, the former head of the Bank of England, Christine Lagarde, the head of the International Monetary Fund, these types of people. And the reason why I came to write about it is because I've seen them over the years, and I call this their yearly migration pattern. Yeah. It starts in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and then they move to conferences and meetings where they meet their peers, and I saw that it's always the same people coming together and essentially making up the rules and influencing the system.
Yeah. So in this populist world, I think people can be skeptical. Is there some people think they're manipulating the masses, not just influencing the masses?
Well, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is I think it's important for everybody to understand how our democracy works, how our institutions work, and how power works. And I think there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there and misrepresentation of the facts, and that results from the fact that this whole system is extremely complex and complicated, and people, actually one way to reduce complexity and find solutions would be to simplify the system, but we can't just do it overnight. Actually, that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump came into power, because he offered simple answers. But I wanted to write this book to explain to people how it works. Of course, I'm biased. It's not a bank bashing book, and the criticism that I do get, say, online is that it's not critical enough. But today, if you write a book about the elites and you don't bash them, it's not good enough because there's such a skepticism towards the elites. But I wanted to give, my experience and rather matter-of-factly present how the system works. And I wanted to make it interesting because it's very dry, and I wanted for my parents and my doctor and people who are not financial people to get a better impression how it works, because I feel that most of the times these superhubs don't necessarily intentionally manipulate the system, but of course they act in their own interest, they act in their interest of their institutions, their shareholders, but many actions are morally agnostic. They're amoral, they're not necessarily immoral. But if all of these superhubs act in the same way and interact with each other in this echo chamber and are essentially removed from the ordinary population, in the aggregate their actions become negative for the system.
Right. Okay. Because you yourself are a superhubs. You're a superhub talking about other superhubs, correct?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a superhub. I'm writing about superhubs, and I write about my own experiences at the express request of the publisher, because I was a little hesitant. I didn't want to make this necessarily my story, but I certainly have interactions with superhubs. I'm not myself a superhub.
Yeah, but super well connected, because I see on, if you just Google you for a minute, you'll see you with, with George Soros and Jamie Dimon and, all these people. So from your interactions with them, what would you say are some of the common characteristics? And we're going to go into some other characteristics and attributes, but is there anything that they all share?
Well, I would say at the top of their fields, and you see that at the top of every field, people are extremely intelligent, they're very well educated, and they're extremely industrious. But what gives them this quantum leap that puts them at the very, very top? And I have identified that part of the reason is that they're masters in building deep and resilient relationships and networks, and it's not just the individual power that they have, but the power in the aggregate that they have through their networks.
Okay, so you mentioned interpersonal skills. So you quote it in the book. So these leaders can outsource all kinds of professional skills. They can outsource but they cannot outsource the interpersonal skills needed to build and develop resilient relationships. So is that really the X factor? Some
of the very basic things of human nature we know so well that we forget we know them. We've kind of absorbed them with our socialization, and we just need to realize them. And the superhubs that I've observed, it may not be obvious, but they're very, very good at maintaining, nurturing relationships and building new relationships.
Okay, yeah. And do you think that this is a lost skill with the millennials coming through, very used to digital networking and LinkedIn, going on LinkedIn and building social networks, but not real personal face-to-face networking?
Yes, digital bytes can never replace personal relationships, and I explain it in more detail in the book why that is, why people can really only connect and build rapport in person and deep trust, and that's why these people who are always pressed for time invest such an inordinate amount of time and effort into building relationships, and they go, okay, granted they have private jets mostly, but they go on the plane and they, travel across time zones to connect with people and to make it a point to meet people at their home turf, to actually also show the effort to see people in their cultural habitat and not just, hold court in wherever they're based.
Yeah, it's interesting because you also, which is good news for us, because I'm former and LeadersIn a global events organizer, but you say Klaus Schwab wrote an article that in 20, 30 years' time, people will not go to conferences anymore because the digital dimension will change how people interact and how conferences are done. So, but you don't agree that digital webinars and that, new platforms, digital platforms for, connecting online are coming up all the time, but that's not the future.
Well, I find it very hard to make any predictions in view of Moore's law. Who knows where we're going to be in 30 years' time? I think that's difficult to say, but for the foreseeable future, I think, also now with the Trump phenomenon, he has called people or suggested people for his cabinet that he has known for a long time. People like to work with people who they know and trust. It's the oldest wisdom in the world. We all know this, but you see this, people tend to forget about it, and also this becomes the central point in conspiracy theories. Why do all these people huddle together who know each other, central bankers and heads of banks and so forth? Because they know each other. They have expertise that one seeks out in the other, and they complement each other well. All of us would do that. If there were, especially in times of crises, people tend to sidestep hierarchies and established rules to work together directly. And if you have an established network like this old boy network where people know each other, it's extremely helpful and very efficient.
Picking up that point you just made there, and I can see how they would all want to be with people that they are similar to them. In fact, you talk about it in the book with homophily, which is a term that you use a lot. And obviously, that term, you define it as similarity breeds connection. But I suppose, isn't that also the limiting term, because it also would kill diversity?
Exactly. The state of the world that we're seeing today, that is very fragile, geopolitically, economically, financially, many people are expecting the next financial crisis to be just around the corner, many institutions, and that is a direct result of homophily. People in the top echelon of institutions is a very homogeneous.
I totally get that point, but do you think that the average Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo that wants to break into that group can, if they don't look like them, for example? I mean, you're it's known as an old boys network, but yet you're female, and there have been, as you said, Christine Lagarde, for example, who's broken in. So is it penetrable? Can you get into that elite group?
Yeah, it's very hard to penetrate. I think 40, 50 years ago it was hard, and then it got a little better, and now it's very hard again. And then one reason is we have to distinguish a little bit between minorities. A woman is one subcategory, but just generally speaking, there's a famous test called the airport test. So let's say a big consulting company or whatever, big corporation, but it's across all levels. They want to hire new people, and they interview, and the people who interview with them, just subconsciously, it's a subconscious bias. I don't think it's necessarily at all intentional, but they kind of sense, does the person have the same reference point, the same accent, the same background, same, golf club, vacation,
right,
schooling, and all of these things. And if you have a lot in common, you connect across more points, and that person usually will become more likable to you. And so you see the problem. People in power hire people who are like them.
Yeah, absolutely. And has it come back to that? You said it was really bad, then it got a bit better, and it's got bad again. Is that because of the 2007-8 economic downturn that means trust? I suppose intuitively you feel like you can trust people that look like you and sound like you?
Yes, I think at the entrance level, specifically in finance, diversity has become greater. There are more women, there are more minorities, but the higher you get in the hierarchy, the more homogeneous it becomes. And again, let's circle back to Donald Trump, the old white men cabinet. There isn't much diversity, and probably the only reason why he asked a couple more women is because he wanted to incorporate his daughter into his team of advisors, and it couldn't be the only female was his daughter, so he hired a couple more. But other than that, it's a very homogeneous cabinet.
Yeah. Somebody told me recently that Sheryl Sandberg might be the the President of the United States one day. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, people have been talking about this for a long time, but again, I mean, she's in a very privileged position, and she wrote this book, LeaderIn, and people, have been critical, and I think to some extent justifiably so, because stars were it's a little bit similar to what I say about Christine Lagarde. These are great exceptions. All stars were aligned that supportive families, and it's not, there's very little, I think, that can be derived from these examples that normal people can actually apply in their everyday work.
Okay. So what advice, which is a shame then, because so we can't just model Christine Lagarde and yourself, who's done very, very well in the global world of finance. So what advice would you give to a young female executive getting into the banking system or any industry sector that wants to rule the world in 20, 30 years' time? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think to rise, you have to be a little better than men. So first and foremost, you have to invest in your education. And now that we live in a knowledge economy, you have to keep on educating yourself to the rest of your life. It's a dynamic process every day. You have to try and accumulate new skills. And then that also insulates you a little bit against gossip and criticism. And then networks, you have to network, because I think that's one of the distinct advantages that women have. They're not plugged into the male networks and power channel and information channels. Women are not plugged into the same power, network, and information channels to the extent that men are. And so they have to work a little harder at networking. And I think first and foremost, they have to be super resilient, because there will most certainly be setbacks and insults and slights, and women cannot afford to be offended. You just have to sort of swallow it and keep a stiff upper lip and keep on going.
Okay, so you must have had a lot of, you must have yourself gone against a lot of stereotypes and advances and rude comments and things along the way. So is that how you dealt with it? You just stiff upper lip, the British way of letting it go over the head?
Yes.
Okay. That must have been tough sometimes, though.
Yes.
Okay. If we can just go back to, we've got you as a world expert in networking. You've obviously been to Davos, and you go to Davos frequently. I think you're going there very soon as well. And I was asked when people found out in our community that we were interviewing you if we could just do a sort of a network quick-fire round, just to make sure that we've got some of the basics on the how to do good networking, sort of quick-fire questions and quick-fire answers. You mentioned in the book the Dunbar number, which means you can only maintain about 150 connections at any one time. So is it quality over quantity, do you think?
Most definitely. What I see with the Superhubs is they have a positive view of humanity. They're naturally interested in other people. They try to see the good in other people. They work on the premise that you can learn something from everyone. And I mean, we're all sort of trained or conditioned to work with biases and put people in boxes that we don't know. And it's part of our survival mechanism, and to some extent it makes sense. But especially in today's world, you never know where you meet whom, and you should be open to people, and you should not prejudge people as a matter of common decency anyway, without having any ulterior motives.
Right.
But if you have this natural disposition and train yourself to think like that and feel like that, then it is helpful with regard to networks. And of course, they build social capital in advance. They, think like, how can I help other people? What can I do for them without expecting something back here and now?
Okay.
But we're all conditioned to think this way on a very subconscious level. We build capital with other people. It's not called social capital for nothing. And when these people get into trouble, or they need help, or they need support, they can call on other people. They can draw on this social capital.
Brilliant. Next quick fire round. What would you say to somebody who thinks that networking is just for the schmoozers and it's almost dirty salesy word? That's what the sales guys do.
Yeah, I see where people are coming from, and I understand that concern, but I don't think it's necessarily justified. And I think the Americans have a very healthy attitude towards networking, and it's probably because it's a melting pot. People have come together from all different cultures and languages and sensitivities, and they have found a common denominator, and the common denominator is we all need to make a living. We're upfront about it. We come together at events, and we all know that we need to network. We're not making false pretenses. That doesn't mean we have to be two-faced, or that doesn't mean we have to be inauthentic or two-faced, but I think it's just a very honest way we can connect, and nobody's forced to do business with other people. And my own view is it's easy to get along with people who you like. That's not, that's a no-brainer. What is really hard and what makes a good networker is to get along with people who may not like you so much, or make it difficult. And I think very few people, and that is justified, sometimes you just don't gel with somebody, and there may be good reasons, it's just very instinctual. But oftentimes people may have reservations towards you because of a perceived slight. You may have not greeted them when you came into a room like 3 years ago. You didn't even notice, but something to offend that person, or for some reason they have a preconceived notion about you. And I think it takes a great person to make the first step and towards the other person, and just see if you can make it work. So the two things that you just mentioned there is about generosity, going in with the mindset of giving, which is a key one, and then going in and sort of rising above anything that might have been historical. Okay, really practical one was emailed me this morning. Do you put all your contacts into a contact management system like ACT? This is really a very practical question, like Salesforce, Excel. How do you manage? I mean, you must have got lots and lots of contacts. How do you maintain all of those contacts practically? I don't, but I don't deal with widgets. I don't have anything to sell. I mean, ACT and these databases, they make sense for people who need to, call on lots of people. But my work is slightly different. I work with, just a handful of advisory clients, so it's very high-level relationships. Nevertheless, I feel I do have many more contacts that I can handle. It's a constant challenge.
Yeah.
I just work with Outlook and lists and try to keep at it.
And then final quick fire round one came in this morning. How do you politely get away from somebody that's boring you senseless, trying to sell you pens, or just blatantly a bit weird?
Just try to say, you mean like at a party?
Yeah.
Yeah, just try and say something gracious. I don't want to monopolize your time or try to pass this person on to someone else. I have to introduce you to so-and-so, or just, see you next round, or just I have to say hello to someone. I mean, there are tons of excuses, for lack of a better term.
If you ever say those to me, I'll know that I'll know what you're actually saying. Extroversion is one of the personality dispositions that people think go naturally with networking. But as you said, the Superhubs, or CEOs of any bank, are running organizations with 300,000 people in them. So is extroversion an important part to be a great networker, or are there introverted Superhubs?
They're more introverted Superhubs than you might think.
Right.
Klaus Schwab, the head of the chairman of the World Economic Forum, is one of them. The advantage is that when you're an introvert, people sense it, and when you are open and you make an effort in dealing with other people, people usually appreciate it because it is and comes across as very authentic and sincere. Because when you do reach out, when you do give your attention, it usually, you have to put in more effort and the other person notices it. I would say I'm an introvert, and I can only do a limited amount of networking at a time because it takes a lot out of me.
Yeah, right, really. I would never have said that about you. Ben Bernanke, obviously you say in your book as well, who is one of the most powerful people in the United States, was also introverted. But so what advice would you give to an introvert that goes into a room, hundreds of people all getting on, and you don't see any of the lone wolves on the side that you can go and save? What advice would you give to them that if they don't feel like networking, but they've got to go and do it anyway?
Well, I would say, and I have these days when you're absolutely not in the mood and you can't get yourself to do it, don't do it, because it probably will come across.
Right.
If you have to do it, and still with all my experience, sometimes I feel uncomfortable when I get into a room and let's say it's full of testosterone, there are no women, and it's very homogeneous, and I don't know anybody and I have to make an effort to, break into a group. I don't always necessarily feel like it, but you just have to get over yourself, and once the ice is broken, usually, it becomes easier. But it's just, that's part of the hard part of networking. Sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But we interviewed Sir Terry Leahy, and sometimes he said, even if you don't feel like doing it, sometimes you just have to do it. If it's about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it?
Very true.
Because as you say in your book, if you're at Davos, you don't want to be not in. I mean, that's such a huge opportunity that even if you don't feel like doing it, you should still do it, right?
You should do it, and you should try to pay it forward. And again, I think Americans are very good at it, and Germans are usually not so good at it. And I come from Germany. People usually, are a little uptight, and when they find someone they know, they stick with that person the entire night because that's who they're comfortable with. But in America, I think it's a little better in that when a person comes into a room and people sense that person doesn't know anyone, people usually make an extra effort to integrate that person, and I've tried to adopt that. And I feel bad if I see a lonely person, a lonely node at the fringe of the network who you can see doesn't really know how to get into things, then it's easy to embrace somebody who just comes in, introduce yourself and integrate them, a group of 3 people or so. And once that person is integrated, it's easier for that person to circulate.
Great. Well, I hope you're in the room next time I'm lost somewhere in the room.
Thank you.
You go to Davos a lot. So, and you mentioned serendipity, the importance of serendipity in this interview already. So if you go to Davos, and do you literally just walk down the corridor and you bump into Bill Gates? I mean, does it happen like people think it does?
Yes, it actually does, but that's a very extraordinary circumstance because one of the secrets of Davos' success is that it takes place in a very small village, and there are, I think all in all, at least 5,000 people are descending on this village, and basically they're locked in this vacuum. So you bump into people, even if you don't want to network, you couldn't escape it because you bump into people at the bus stop, the shuttle, the Davos shuttle stop, or the code check, or wherever you're waiting in line, and there are lines everywhere. But it's extremely efficient because you just can't help meeting people that you already know who introduce you to other people, or you could just introduce yourself, because people didn't know me necessarily, but I know everybody. So you can just approach people because they feel they're in a safe space, so they let their guard down, and they're in like casual clothes, and it's just very easy to interact in this social environment.
Yeah, that's right. How, by the way, if you ever need anyone to carry your bags, just email me. But how do you, let's just say the average Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo is watching this interview and they're very aspirational and they want to one day get to Davos, or they want to be one of these superhubs or these high achieving people. What are some of the steps you think that you need to take in order to have a shot of getting in to these circles?
It depends on the network. There are all sorts of networks. Now I'm writing about the very highest level and financial networks, but there are different networks, cultural networks, and music or whatever it may be. I think the secret, and that goes back to homophily, is to develop as many commonalities as you can. So you have a lot of things in common. People can relate to you. Try to get achievements under your belts, have the same reference points, speak the same language, have currency, conversational currency, bring something interesting to the table. People must want to associate with you. You don't want to spend your time with boring people, right? So you have to be interesting, you have to add to something, the lower you are in the food chain, the more you have to try to build social capital.
Right, okay. Yeah, but as you say, you can't just be a schmoozer, you need to add some conversational currency and content to the... And I suppose that all comes back to the fact that, you talk about the importance of obsession as, looking at some of the common characteristics, that they're all quite obsessed. And if you are obsessed by your industry or what you're doing, then you'll have that social conversational capital to add. You talk here about obsession. You're saying Elon Musk's ex-wife Justine put it best when she said, extreme success results from an extreme personality. So extreme personalities and being obsessed by things, what is it that they are obsessed by? Is it power? Is it wealth? Is it leadership? Is it influence? Doing better in the world? What do you think these superhubs are obsessed by? Drives them?
It depends. There are different silos, I would say. I would say many of the men are driven by the desire to acquire power, and I think the fewest people are motivated purely by money on that level. Money for them is just a yardstick to distinguish themselves from other people as a measure of their success. Many of the people who I've seen and know live rather modestly. They don't live in gilded palaces. Because they can have everything, I think it means less to them. But then, central bank governors or the Nouriel Roubini academics, an academic who I used to work with, they're more driven by content. They want to be at the top of their field, and they really thrive on intellectual, academic environment and, at the very highest level. I personally am motivated by working with really interesting people and keeping on learning and having exposure to interesting things. That's what motivates me. So everybody is driven by something. If you have a 9-to-5 job and prefer to have the weekend off, you're probably not going to get there. Most superhubs, there is no delineation between private and professional lives. It completely overlaps. Their contacts are networks. They see the same people over the weekend that they've worked with. They see the same people in Singapore at the country club or at a party than like they see in New York. So it's all one thing. They're never quite off. You always have to be. You're always on duty. Yeah,
a lot of people we've interviewed talk about sort of work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance.
It's forget about it. No balance. But they enjoy it. They like it. If somebody calls me on, maybe from a different time zone on a Saturday night to get some information, or they need something done by Monday, chances are I'm not going to say no. Actually, I always say yes. So still.
But that's probably why you're successful, because you always say yes.
Probably, but I also enjoy it. Usually it's
Yeah.
research or it's an interesting project, and
Yeah.
I'm flattered that I'm asked,
Yeah.
or I'm thrilled that I can work with a certain
Yeah.
company or party. So yes, I put my all into it.
Yeah.
It's not a 9-to-5 job. I have more freedom on the one hand, but I can see how it is difficult with a family, and I think a lot of the Superhubs' family take a second row
That's right.
to the profession.
Yeah, because you do say in the book that a lot of them are absent when it comes to partners or family. But you do actually point out a good side to that. You say that divorce rates are very, very low, and you say this could be due to making the best out of the little time available, having fewer opportunities to argue, which I think is a great point. But I suppose there's also going through a divorce saps these people of energy, time, focus as a distraction. So let's look at some of the other attributes, if you can. I mean, you talk about alpha personalities, and sometimes they can be you say fueled by extreme confidence or extreme insecurities. How often do you think it's the latter?
I think it's often insecurities.
Yeah.
Actually, I know, and I haven't really written about it in the book because sometimes it's things that I've become aware in personal interactions or things that family members have told me that I was uncomfortable putting into the public domain because it's not public knowledge. It may not be anything dramatic or super interesting, but for sure many people who don't have the best self-confidence or have been slighted before have a chip on their shoulders, and that can be extremely motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a friend of mine who went for very, very driven, and they went for therapy and found out that her mother didn't love her very much, so she's extremely insecure, most driven person on the planet. And then she went for therapy and realised it didn't matter if her mother didn't love her, and then she's just can't get any energy and no motivation. It's totally gone. So you've got to love your insecurities as well. They can be
Okay, I'm not going to see a shrink then.
No, I won't either. I'll stay away. Let's talk about George Soros. I mean, you obviously know him. You know, and he, like you, when you first got to New York, you had no money and no contacts, nor did he. So according to Forbes today, his real-time net worth is $24.9 billion. Is it extreme personality? Is it extreme risk? What got him to go from there to there?
Yeah, he's an extreme case, and I think his experiences as a survivor of the Holocaust gave him an intuition that has proven very helpful in sensing impending inflection points. Like when really big developments are around the corners, he has a sense, like a seventh sense, but also he has the greatest networks. That was the whole point of the book. And for him to be one of my main characters is that he has consistently built networks, overlapping vast networks, all sorts of different types of networks, business and philanthropic and political and economic. All these networks together exponentially increase his power. And for an investor, information is the key to success. And if he, through his network, gets many pieces of the puzzle, more than the average Joe, it may not be any, state secret or anything that's, he just has more pieces of the puzzle and the experience to put it together and to make a judgment. And of course, it's not as if he's never lost money. He's also lost billions too. But on the whole, he's very successful. And I think it's because, and that's one of the points of my book, is he's a superhub who understands how the world works. And that's what superhubs, that's why they're successful, because they have this 10,000-foot perspective, and they see how the world works, and most other people don't.
And I suppose, as you say, I mean, he was willing to put a lot of money on the pound, and that is, I think, the pound going down. I think that's what made him. So it's taking extreme risk as well, but calculated risk, and having the leverage to be able to take opportunities when you see them.
Yes, I think the breaking the pound was something that put him on the map publicly. But I think he did many things that contributed to his success, and this, of course, created a lot of publicity. But he also, what is important is to generate content. being rich can give you prestige, but never as much as content and intellectual content. And all the superhubs have distinguished themselves in one way or another by putting out an ideology or a thought construct or a theory that distinguishes them from the rest of us. And they're taking an intellectual leadership.
Right, absolutely.
And this is the same with consequences. Why is the World Economic Forum so extraordinarily important as a networking platform? It's not just bringing together people. Why do these people come? Because the forum offers content.
Absolutely, yeah. And talking about the content, you say that one of the most enormous benefits of having this network is not a sort of a vanity fact that George Soros. It's the fact that you say in finance the most valuable currency is actionable information that can be converted into monetary gain. And so with the amount of misinformation, there's a lot of information out there, but the amount of misinformation, Facebook even calls it fake news. And so I suppose one of the benefits of this enormous network is that you can hear firsthand from the source information, which is in finance and any industry enormously valuable.
Yes, I started writing this book 5 years ago, which was way before fake news, but misinformation has always been a powerful weapon in finance. And so not only do these people have direct access to information, but also these people make information, what a central bank governor is going to, the way he thinks, what he's going to decide. He's not going to tell anybody, but just knowing him and sensing where things may be going is a piece of the puzzle that is valuable. Other people may, if investors talk to CEOs, where it's legal, and I would say generally people are pretty careful, but you get a better sense of where things are heading, and that's an invaluable advantage. And of course, for people to tell you something, they have to have trust.
That's right.
Right? They're not going to just tell this to anybody.
No, absolutely right. Yeah. Some of the conspiracy theories out there is that the whole, everyone owns their Ferraris and their super yachts because of insider trading. I mean, how prolific is that? As you said legal information, but how prolific is illegal, do you think, within the business world and the finance world?
Well, I wrote my thesis on insider information many moons ago, but insider trading is illegal, and we have seen in the realm of scandals in the financial world many illegal activities. That's not what I'm writing about in this book. Illegal is illegal, and that's for the law to decide. What I focus more on is, especially in the later chapters, the gray areas, which I think have become a problem, where things where everybody did, what wasn't illegal was supposed to be allowed. People did and got away, whatever they got away with. I call it the catch me if you can culture in banking and finance. And there was a study by a Swiss university saying that the finance profession kind of breeds a certain dishonesty. It's just inherent in the system and the incentives and the culture and this macho culture and this, my profit is bigger than yours kind of pressure. And so, I think the gray areas are the real problem, because regulating things and the law is a bit of a problem, especially in our vastly accelerated world, because by the time you make the rules and they come into effect, the world has changed already, and then that's going to create other problems. For instance, banking regulation. After the crisis, we instituted stricter banking regulation, increasingly so, and now all the risky activity has gone into the shadow banking system, creating another risk that we haven't regulated. So, and this is another factor I'm addressing in the book, is complexity thinking, that we need to rethink our whole system, redesign the system, and we need to employ a different kind of thinking to ask different questions, because apparently the way we've dealt with things so far hasn't gotten us very far. It's gotten us more towards the brink.
You mentioned a few moments ago about the fact that there is a sort of ruthlessness element to the business world. Talking about George Soros, for example, is known as being quite ruthless, and there are phrases like, for example, eat what you kill. You're only as good as your last deal in the finance world. So and you said it can be full of testosterone. So how do all of these CEOs get to the top seem very sociable and affable on the outside, and willing to do good, but underneath, is there a very, very hardcore, ruthless underbelly for these people, willing to do whatever it takes?
Well, first of all, they're very open to risk, and risk that is directly correlated to hormones, testosterone namely. And so that's one aspect. And then, yes, I do think to some extent you have to tune off your emotions, and they would probably rationalize it, and I call it the Teflonic, the willful blindness towards things and rationalizing facts. Because yes, they have to be tough, because otherwise they're going to be overtaken by the competition.
Right. Okay. So that toughness is a requirement. Absolutely. And is that something you can build and get tougher, or is it something you're born with? This element of risk taking and doing whatever it takes, Teflon coating, if you like.
I think both. I think people rise up in the system who are like that, who have a natural disposition, or you kind of get into this mill, into this treadmill, and then you adapt and become like it, or you make a conscious decision, like many women do at a certain level, who say, I don't really need this. I don't want to deal with this testosterone. I don't want to partake in this culture. It's annoying. I'm not really getting anywhere. Bye-bye. I'm starting my own company, or I'm going into a different field.
2 questions, if I can, because I know that you're rushing off for another meeting, and your time is extremely valuable. So thank you for the time you're spending with us today. Actually, the penultimate question is about time, and you actually talk about it in the book, saying that the Superhubs are acutely aware that they can always, and I quote, always make more money, but can never make more time. So how do highly successful people actually manage and see time from an organizational perspective, and where they decide to spend their time and invest their time?
They prioritize quality over quantity, and they're extremely disciplined with regard to time. You have to be, if you travel across time zones, they're very disciplined with their timing, their diet, their exercise. They're like in Davos, some parties go on very long, but those who are really disciplined say bye-bye at a certain time, and they're up early in the morning. So it's a little rigid, but you have to be disciplined.
Yeah, so self-discipline is a real characteristic of... Is that quite similar to organization? Being highly organized, or is it, I suppose you've got to have the discipline to be organized, haven't you? So
I would say most people who I know are extremely well organized.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question, if I can. Right at the beginning of your book, you say you dedicate your book to your parents and to your grandparents. Why was that? Is that because they had a huge impact on you, has shaped you who you are today?
Because they're the Superhubs of my life. And I say, we're all part of networks, and we start out being attached to someone, physically, literally, and thereafter our place in the world is determined by our place in networks. And I owe my grandparents and my parents everything. They've always unconditionally supported and loved me, and I think with regard to the profession, or generally in life, it's very important to be grateful and acknowledge people who have stood by you and supported you throughout.
Beautiful way to end, and we're in fact very grateful for your time with us today. Sandra Navidi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Thank you.
Thanks.